Red and blue lights sliced through the heavy midnight fog along Interstate 20. A simple traffic stop was about to unravel a dark web of corruption hidden behind a county badge. When two aggressive patrolmen pulled over a quiet, unassuming driver for a fabricated infraction, they expected an easy target to bully and intimidate. They pushed him to the edge with blatant prejudice. What they did not realize was that the man behind the wheel was their new superior officer, and he was watching every move with the cold precision of a hunter who had finally found his prey. The rain came down in sheets, heavy and unrelenting, turning the asphalt of Interstate 20 into a slick black mirror. It was 2:14 in the morning in DeKalb County, Georgia, a sprawling jurisdiction of affluent suburbs giving way to industrial stretches and dense pine forests. Behind the wheel of a faded blue 2012 Ford Taurus, Calvin Brooks kept his eyes fixed on the road, the rhythmic thud of the windshield wipers providing the only soundtrack to the storm of thoughts raging inside him. At 38 years old, Calvin wore his exhaustion deep in his bones like a second skin. He had spent the last 15 years climbing the ranks of Georgia state law enforcement, building a reputation as a meticulous, unyielding investigator. Just 3 days earlier, he had been officially sworn in as the new captain of the DeKalb County Sheriff's Office Internal Affairs Division. A quiet transfer from the Georgia Bureau of Investigation, ordered by Atlanta's mayor for one reason: the East Precinct. For years, the East Precinct ran like a frat house with badges. Complaints of racial profiling, unlawful searches, and excessive force from South Side minority neighborhoods piled up and were ignored. The county teetered on a federal lawsuit. Calvin operated deep under the radar, his face unknown to graveyard shift deputies. Tonight, Calvin was dressed in civilian clothes, a simple gray hoodie over a plain white t-shirt, faded jeans, and a pair of worn-out work boots. He was driving a seized fleet vehicle, completely unmarked and purposely unremarkable. He looked exactly like an ordinary working-class black man driving home after a long, grueling late shift at a warehouse or construction site. As Calvin navigated the sweeping curve near exit 42, his rearview mirror suddenly flared with a blinding, harsh light. A Dodge Charger cruiser rode his bumper so close he could see its grille through the rain. Calvin checked his speedometer, 55 in a 65. No drift, lights working, tags current. No legal reason for the stop. Calvin's pulse remained steady, but his professional instincts instantly sharpened into a razor's edge. Hands at 10 and 2, he held steady for 2 miles while the cruiser weaved, an intimidation play. He signaled right to let it pass. Instead of passing, the Charger aggressively swerved behind him again. Red and blue lights exploded. Siren cut the storm. Calvin exhaled, pulled onto the gravel shoulder, parked, killed the engine, rolled down all windows, flipped the dome light, and laid both empty hands on the wheel. He watched the side mirror. The doors of the cruiser popped open. 2 officers stepped out into the freezing rain. Tall, swaggering Lawson and wired, gun-hand Decker. Calvin knew them from the personnel files. The 2 behind a disproportionate share of East Precinct force complaints. Lawson escalated stops into violence. Decker wrote the lies. Calvin decided not to announce himself. He would let them run their playbook and document every violation. The trap was set. Boots crunched. A tactical flashlight slammed into Calvin's eyes. He squinted, but kept hands on the wheel. "Keep your hands right where I can see them, boy," Lawson's voice. The word boy dripped with condescension. Calvin filed it. "My hands are on the wheel, officer," Calvin replied, his voice calm, deep, and perfectly steady. Lawson pinned the light. Decker tapped the rear glass and swept the empty back seat. "Do you know why I pulled you over tonight?" Lawson demanded. He leaned in with the stink of coffee and tobacco. "I have no idea, officer. I was maintaining the speed limit and staying in my lane." "You were swerving," Lawson lied effortlessly, his tone mocking. "Crossing the center line back there. Looked like you were driving under the influence. Where are you coming from at this time of night? Work, Calvin answered simply. Work, Lawson repeated, scoffing. He dragged the beam of the flashlight up and down Calvin's worn hoodie. What kind of work you do dressed like a thug? You look like you're out looking for houses to hit. Racial profiling hung thick. Calvin filed it. I work late hours. Is there a problem, officer? I ask the questions. License, registration, insurance. Move slow or this night gets bad. My wallet is in my back right pocket. The registration and insurance are in the glove compartment, Calvin narrated clearly. Get the wallet first. Slowly, Lawson ordered. Calvin kept left hand on wheel, slid wallet free, handed over the license. Badge stayed locked under the seat. Lawson snatched it, smirked. Calvin Brooks, now the registration. Hands where I can see them. Calvin retrieved the fleet papers. Registered to a state shell company. Legal, but unremarkable. Lawson looked over the paperwork, then tapped the roof of the car twice. Sit tight, Calvin. Don't make any sudden moves. Lawson returned to the cruiser. Decker stayed, hand on gun, glaring. They wanted attitude, an excuse. Lawson ran the license. Clean record, valid registration. The stop should have ended. It didn't. 5 minutes later, Lawson returned, rain-matted and angrier. No license returned. All right, Calvin, here's how this is going to go. Step out of the vehicle. Officer, license and registration are valid. No warrants. What legal pretext? Shock, then fury. Because I smell marijuana, Lawson lied, the words flowing out with practiced ease. Strong odor of unburnt marijuana coming from the cab of the vehicle. That gives me probable cause. Now unbuckle your seatbelt and step out of the damn car before I pull you out through this window. The phantom smell lie. Oldest dirty cop trick. Skeleton key past the Fourth Amendment. Officer Lawson, no drugs. I do not consent. I will comply under duress, but this order is unlawful. Decker smashed his flashlight on the window, drew his weapon. Get out now, arrogant piece of trash. Hands visible. Lethal now. Calvin unbuckled slowly, right hand high. I am stepping out of the vehicle, Calvin announced loudly. Boots hit asphalt. Lawson spun him and slammed him into the Taurus. Calvin gritted his teeth. Spread your legs! Lawson kicked his ankles hard. You're making a massive mistake, Calvin said against the metal. Decker wrenched his arm high behind his back. Tough guy thinks he knows the law, Lawson sneered, patting him down hard. Where are the drugs? Weapon? Unarmed. I do not consent to any vehicle search. No probable cause. I told you I smell weed, Lawson mocked. Decker dove into the Taurus and tore it apart. Glove box off hinges, console broken. Calvin stood cuffed, arm twisted, watching. Nothing up front, then under the seat, the matte black lockbox. Well, well, Wyatt, our boy has a secret. Lawson shoved harder. What's in the box? Drugs? Cash? Guns? Officer Lawson, secured container. No warrant. Force it and you commit a felony. Decker pulled a knife, tried the seam. Code or key, now. Open that box and your careers end tonight, both of you. Threatening an officer? Lawson twisted until the shoulder popped. Resisting. Crowbar from the trunk. Wait. Emergency key is on the ignition ring. Use it. Decker grabbed the key, clicked the lid open. Inside, state-issued Glock 19 and a heavy gold captain's badge. Engraved, Internal Affairs Division, DeKalb County Sheriff's Office. Wyatt, badge and a piece. Decker held the gold shield to the lights. You son of a bitch! Lawson threw him against the cruiser and cuffed the other wrist tight enough to cut circulation. Stolen badge and gun. Calvin stood tall, rain on his face, no fear. Impersonating an officer and theft of a firearm? I'm booking you. State pen, boy. Wrong cops. No, you messed with the wrong captain. Raid me my rights. Then we ride. The heavy metal door of the cruiser slammed shut, sealing Calvin Brooks in the cramped hard plastic back seat. The handcuffs were biting mercilessly into his wrists, the metal cold and unyielding. But Calvin's face remained a mask of absolute stone. He leaned his head back against the wire mesh divider, his eyes fixed on the back of Wyatt Lawson's head. Lawson threw the cruiser into drive, the tires spinning on the wet gravel before catching and launching the heavy car back onto Interstate 20. He did not turn the sirens back on, but he kept the light bar flashing, cutting a jagged path through the driving rain. "You're a special kind of stupid, Calvin," Lawson sneered over the roar of the engine and the beating windshield wipers. He glanced in the rearview mirror, his eyes locking onto Calvin's reflection. "You really thought you could boost a captain's shield and a state-issued sidearm and just cruise around DeKalb? What were you going to do? Pawn it? Flash it to get out of a speeding ticket?" Calvin did not say a word. He sat perfectly still. He was running a mental checklist, cataloging every single procedural failure. Unlawful stop, unlawful order, illegal search and seizure, unlawful detention, assault, failure to read Miranda rights. The list was growing by the minute. In the passenger seat, Decker was silent. He had the Glock 19 resting on the dashboard and was turning the gold captain's badge over and over in his hands. The streetlights flashed through the cabin, illuminating the deep, meticulous engraving on the shield. "Wyatt," Decker murmured, his voice barely audible over the heater's fan. "This shield, it's heavy. The details on the eagle, the enamel on the state seal. It doesn't look like a replica. And the serial number on the Glock matches a law enforcement registry block. So he broke into a cop's house or raided an evidence locker," Lawson snapped, waving his hand dismissively. "Who cares? It just means the DA is going to bury him under the jail. Theft of police property, impersonating an officer, possession of a stolen firearm. We're getting commendations for this, Clint. We just pulled a major felon off the street." "I don't know, man," Decker whispered, his bravado from the highway rapidly evaporating. He looked back at Calvin. Calvin's eyes shifted, locking onto Decker's. There was no panic in the prisoner's gaze, no anger, just a cold, calculating assessment. It sent a sudden icy shiver down Decker's spine. "Stop sweating, Clint," Lawson barked, taking a sharp turn onto Memorial Drive without using his blinker, tossing Calvin hard against the door panel. "He's nobody." 10 minutes later, the cruiser pulled into the secured rear lot of the East Precinct. Lawson parked aggressively in the Sally Port, cutting the engine and stepping out into the damp, echoing garage. He yanked the rear door open and grabbed Calvin by the bicep, hauling him out. "Let's go, Captain," Lawson mocked, shoving Calvin toward the heavy steel doors of the intake area. "Let's get you booked." They marched into the precinct. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a sickly pale yellow glow over the scuffed linoleum floors. At 3:18 a.m., the bullpen was mostly empty. A few night shift officers were huddled over their desks, typing up reports or nursing stale coffee. Behind the raised wooden platform of the front desk sat Desk Sergeant Earl Miller, a 20-year veteran with a graying mustache and a look of permanent exhaustion. "What do we have, Lawson?" Miller asked, not looking up from the crossword puzzle he was filling out. "Another public intox?" Lawson boasted loudly. He shoved Calvin forward, forcing him to stand against the booking counter. "Got a real genius tonight. Caught him swerving on the 20. Pulled him out because the car smelled like a reggae concert. Guess what we found under his seat?" Lawson slammed the Glock 19 and the gold badge down on the wooden counter. The heavy metal clattered loudly. Miller finally looked up. His eyes dropped to the gun, then to the gold shield. He frowned, reaching out and picking up the badge. He rubbed his thumb over the engraving. "He's got a stolen piece and a stolen badge," Lawson continued, leaning against the counter with a smug grin. "Claims it's his. You believe the nerve of this guy? Throw him in holding, Sarge. I'm going to take my time writing this one up. Make sure the charges stick like glue." Sergeant Miller did not say anything. He turned the badge over, looking at the specialized serial number stamped into the back of the brass. Slowly, Miller turned to his computer terminal. He logged into the statewide secure personnel database and typed in the serial number. A bright red banner flashed across the top of the monitor. Classified personnel, Internal Affairs Command. Level 1, clearance only. Miller's blood ran cold. He pulled the file. A high-resolution photo of a man in dress uniform with the exact same gold shield stared back. The face of the handcuffed man in the soaked hoodie matched perfectly. Miller swallowed hard, the color completely draining from his face. He looked at Lawson, who was still grinning, oblivious to the nuclear bomb he had just brought into the station. "Lawson," Miller said, his voice dropping to a hoarse whisper. "Where did you make this stop?" "Interstate 20 near exit 42. "Why?" Lawson asked, his smile faltering slightly at the look of absolute terror on the sergeant's face. Miller did not answer. He picked up the desk phone and dialed a 4-digit extension. He waited 3 rings before a gruff voice answered. "Commander Harrison," Miller said, his voice trembling. "I need you down at the front desk right now." "Yes, sir. It's a code black." The bullpen fell dead silent. A code black was not an official radio code. It was precinct slang for a catastrophic internal screw-up. The few officers scattered around the room stopped typing. Decker, standing a few feet behind Lawson, suddenly looked like he was going to vomit. "What are you doing, Miller?" Lawson demanded, his arrogance finally cracking, replaced by a surge of nervous aggression. "Just book the guy. He's a thief." "Shut your mouth, Wyatt," Miller snapped, his voice cracking like a whip. "Do not say another word. Do not move." Before Lawson could protest, the heavy wooden door leading to the command offices swung open. Commander Richard Harrison stormed out. Harrison was a massive man, built like a linebacker, wearing dress slacks and a white shirt with the sleeves rolled up. He looked furious at being dragged out of his office at 3 in the morning. "What the hell is going on out here, Miller?" Harrison barked, marching toward the front desk. "This better be good." "Sir," Miller said, stepping aside and pointing a shaking finger at the man in handcuffs. "Look." Harrison's eyes shifted to Calvin. The commander stopped dead in his tracks. The anger instantly vanished from his face, replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated horror. Harrison had been in the private closed-door meetings with the mayor and the Georgia Bureau of Investigation all week. Harrison looked at Calvin in the wet hoodie and tight handcuffs. Then he looked down at the desk, seeing the Glock and the gold shield sitting next to Lawson's hand. "Oh my God," Harrison breathed. "Commander, we caught this guy with stolen police property," Lawson started, trying to salvage his moment of glory. "I pulled him over." "Silence!" Harrison roared, his voice echoing off the concrete walls with such force that Lawson physically recoiled. Harrison turned back to Calvin, his posture instantly shifting from authoritative to rigidly subordinate. "Captain Brooks," Harrison said, his voice tight with panic. I am so incredibly sorry. This is a catastrophic misunderstanding." Lawson's jaw dropped. He looked at Harrison, then at Calvin, the blood rushing out of his face, leaving him a sickening shade of gray. "Captain? Commander, what are you talking about? He's a civilian. Look at him." Calvin Brooks finally moved. He stood up straight, his posture completely shifting, shedding the persona of the weary civilian like a snake shedding its skin. He looked clinical, infinitely more terrifying than anger. "Sergeant Miller," Calvin said, his voice ringing with absolute, undeniable authority. "Come around this desk and remove these handcuffs immediately." "Yes, sir. Right away, sir." Miller scrambled, grabbing a pair of standard handcuff keys from his belt. He rushed around the counter, his hands shaking as he unlocked the metal bracelets. Calvin rubbed his wrists slowly, feeling the blood rush back into his hands. He looked at the deep red grooves the tight metal had left on his skin. He did not say a word. He walked over to the booking desk, picked up his Glock, checked the chamber, and slid it smoothly into the waistband of his jeans. Then he picked up the gold shield. He did not put it in his pocket. He clipped it directly onto the collar of his wet hoodie. The gold flashed violently under the fluorescent lights. Calvin turned slowly to face Lawson and Decker. Decker was trembling, staring at the floor, completely defeated. Lawson was still frozen, his brain desperately trying to reject the reality of his situation. "Officer Wyatt Lawson, Officer Clint Decker," Calvin said, his voice cold, precise, and devoid of any mercy. "As of this exact moment, you are both stripped of your police powers. You are suspended without pay pending an immediate top-down criminal investigation by the Internal Affairs Division." "Captain, wait," Lawson stammered, raising his hands, his previous arrogance entirely shattered. "We didn't know. You weren't in a marked car. You weren't in uniform. We thought you were just some guy. If we knew who you were, if you knew who I was, you would have treated me with respect," Calvin interrupted, taking a slow, deliberate step toward Lawson. "But because you thought I was just some guy, you decided the law didn't apply to you." Calvin pointed a finger at Lawson's chest. "You initiated a traffic stop without probable cause. You fabricated a moving violation. You subjected me to an unlawful search of my vehicle based on the fictitious smell of narcotics. You damaged state property during that illegal search. You detained me under false pretenses. You subjected me to excessive force, physical assault, and unlawful use of restraints." Calvin took another step forward, his voice dropping to a lethal whisper. "You didn't make a mistake, Lawson. You executed a standard operating procedure. A procedure you have used on dozens, maybe hundreds of innocent civilians in this county. The only difference tonight is that you pulled over the one man who has the power to destroy you for it." "Commander," Lawson pleaded, looking desperately at Harrison. "Tell him we were just doing proactive policing. It was a dark road. He looked suspicious." "Do not look at him," Calvin commanded. "You answer to me now, Sergeant Miller." "Yes, Captain Brooks." Miller stood at rigid attention. "Relieve these men of their duty belts, their weapons, their badges, and their radios," Calvin ordered. "Once they are disarmed, place them in separate holding cells. They are not to speak to each other. They are not to make any phone calls. And I want the dash cam and body cam footage from their cruiser downloaded and handed directly to me on an encrypted drive within the next 5 minutes. If 1 second of that footage goes missing, I will arrest everyone in this room for evidence tampering." "It'll be done, sir," Miller said, moving quickly toward Lawson. "You can't do this!" Lawson shouted, his fear finally giving way to desperate, cornered anger. "You set us up. This is entrapment. Entrapment requires me to coerce you into committing a crime you wouldn't otherwise commit," Calvin replied coldly. "I didn't make you pull me over. I didn't make you lie about my driving. I didn't make you pry open my lockbox. All I did was sit in my car and watch you dig your own grave. Hand over your belt, Lawson." Lawson hesitated, his hand resting near his sidearm. "Wyatt, don't," Decker whispered, his voice cracking. Decker unclipped his own duty belt, letting it drop to the floor with a heavy thud. He unpinned his badge and placed it on the counter. "It's over, man. Just do it." Lawson looked around the room. Slowly, his hands shaking with rage and humiliation, Lawson unbuckled his belt and slammed it onto the desk next to Calvin. "Take them to holding," Calvin instructed Miller. As the 2 disgraced officers were marched away, stripped of their power and their dignity, Calvin turned to Commander Harrison. "Commander," Calvin said, straightening his hoodie, the gold badge gleaming brightly. "We need to talk about your division, my office, now." The door to Commander Richard Harrison's office clicked shut, cutting off the chaotic hum of the stunned bullpen. Harrison sank into his heavy leather chair. Calvin Brooks did not sit down. He stood in the center of the room. He carefully removed his Glock 19 from his waistband, dropped the magazine, ejected the chambered round, and placed the weapon safely on Harrison's mahogany desk. The heavy gold captain's shield remained pinned to his chest, catching the dim glow of the desk lamp. "Captain Brooks," Harrison started, pulling a handkerchief from his pocket and dabbing at his sweating forehead. I want to personally assure you that this is an isolated incident. Wyatt Lawson and Clint Decker are bad apples. We have had our suspicions, of course, but nothing concrete. I will draft their termination papers tonight. We can allow them to quietly resign in lieu of termination to avoid a public scandal that would hurt the department's image. Calvin stared at him, his expression completely unreadable. Resign in lieu of termination, Calvin repeated softly, the words dripping with absolute contempt. You think I came to DeKalb to protect your public relations, Commander? You think I sat in the freezing rain, taking physical abuse from your rogue deputies, just so you could offer them a quiet retirement with their pensions intact? Captain, if this goes public, the federal scrutiny is already here, Richard, Calvin interrupted, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. That is why the mayor brought me in. That is why the Georgia Bureau of Investigation bypassed your entire chain of command. You have over 80 civilian complaints filed against the East Precinct in the last 14 months. Unlawful searches, missing cash during traffic stops, excessive force. You buried them all under the guise of internal reviews. You let this rot spread. A heavy knock at the door interrupted them. Sergeant Miller entered, carrying a secure encrypted flash drive, handing the drive to Calvin. The dash cam and body cam footage, Captain. Uploaded and isolated. Thank you, Sergeant. Dismissed, Calvin said. He turned to Harrison, pointing to the commander's computer monitor. Plug it in. We are going to watch this together. Harrison obliged, his hand shaking as he inserted the drive and opened the encrypted video files. He focused on the cabin audio from before the lights. Pause, Calvin ordered suddenly. Go back 40 seconds. Boost the audio gain on the internal cabin microphone. Harrison adjusted the settings. The audio hissed loudly over the sound of the windshield wipers. Lawson's voice could be heard muttering to Decker. Look at this beater, Lawson's voice crackled through the speakers. Late model Taurus, out-of-state plates, dark tint. Let's run a 1054. Looks like a heavy payout. You sure, Wyatt? Decker replied, sounding nervous. Foster wants his cut by tomorrow. Foster gets his cut when I get mine, Lawson scoffed. Hit the lights. Calvin's eyes narrowed into dangerous slits. He reached over and hit the pause button himself. The office fell dead silent again. A 1054, Calvin said, his voice deadly quiet. Standard dispatch code for an animal carcass on the highway, but that's not what they were talking about. Was it, Commander? Out-of-state plates, dark tint, heavy payout, and a cut going to Foster. Harrison looked completely sick. He recognized the name instantly. Lieutenant Raymond Foster was the shift supervisor for the midnight patrol. He was the man responsible for signing off on all arrest reports and evidence logs for the entire division. They were hunting, Calvin deduced. This wasn't just racial profiling. This was an organized civil asset forfeiture ring. Your deputies are profiling out-of-town drivers, fabricating probable cause, illegally searching their vehicles, and stealing their cash under the guise of seizing drug money. And they're kicking a percentage up to Lieutenant Foster to ensure the reports disappear. Captain, I had absolutely no idea, Harrison pleaded, gripping the edge of his desk. I swear to you, your ignorance does not absolve you of your incompetence, Commander, Calvin snapped. He grabbed the flash drive and pulled it from the computer. Do not leave this office. Do not touch your phone. If you attempt to contact Lieutenant Foster, I will charge you with obstruction of justice and accessory to a criminal syndicate. Calvin marched out of the office and headed straight for the holding cells in the basement of the precinct. He bypassed the main holding area and stepped into interview room A. Officer Wyatt Lawson was sitting handcuffed to the ring, arrogance gone, eyes hollow. Calvin walked in, pulling a thick metal folding chair out and sitting across from Lawson. He tossed the encrypted flash drive onto the center of the table. I am going to make this very simple for you, Wyatt, Calvin began. You are not facing administrative charges. You are not facing a simple suspension. You are currently looking at a minimum of 15 years in federal prison for deprivation of rights under color of law, aggravated assault, and armed robbery. Lawson flinched, the color draining further from his cheeks. I want my union rep. I want William Carter. You can have William Carter, Calvin replied smoothly. But William Carter cannot save you from the Federal Bureau of Investigation. And he certainly cannot save you from the audio recording I just pulled off your cruiser's hard drive. Lawson's eyes darted toward the flash drive. His breath hitched. I heard the conversation, Calvin continued, leaning forward, invading Lawson's space. I heard you call a 1054. I heard you mention Lieutenant Foster and his cut. I know exactly how your operation works. You target vulnerable people. You smash their cars. You terrorize them. And you steal their money. You thought you were untouchable. It wasn't my idea, Lawson stammered, his voice breaking. I don't care whose idea it was, Calvin said coldly. I care about who is running it. Right now, Clint Decker is sitting in interview room B. He is a younger, weaker man than you, Wyatt. My team is about to offer him a plea deal. The first man to give me Lieutenant Foster, the first man to hand over the ledger and testify against the entire syndicate, gets state immunity. The other man goes to a maximum security federal penitentiary where former cops do not survive. Loyalty evaporated. Foster! Lawson practically screamed, pulling against the handcuffs. It's Foster. He runs the whole thing. He flags the cars he wants us to hit based on out-of-state database pulls. He tells us which stretches of the highway have blind spots for the traffic cameras. We bring him the cash. He takes 60% and washes the complaints from the system. He keeps a ledger in a firebox in the trunk of his personal SUV. I can give you the exact license plate. Calvin did not smile. He simply pulled a miniature digital recorder from his pocket and pressed stop. You have the right to remain silent, Mr. Lawson. I highly suggest you start using it. By 5:22 a.m., the storm had broken. Calvin Brooks stood in the precinct's secured rear parking lot. He had traded his wet hoodie for a tactical ballistic vest with the word Captain emblazoned in bright yellow letters across the back. Beside him stood District Attorney Samuel Higgins. Behind them, 3 unmarked black vans pulled into the lot. The doors slid open in unison, and 20 heavily armed agents from the Georgia Bureau of Investigation poured out, moving with silent, lethal efficiency. Are we green, Captain? The tactical lead asked, chambering around in his rifle. We are green, Calvin confirmed, checking his watch. Lieutenant Foster is scheduled to end his shift and return to the precinct in 10 minutes. Secure the exits, lock down the armory, seize all physical servers and the evidence locker. Nobody makes a phone call. Nobody leaves the building. Copy that! Move! The tactical lead barked. The state agents breached the rear doors of the precinct, flooding the hallways like a tidal wave of black Kevlar. The morning shift officers just arriving with their coffees and donuts were instantly pinned to the walls, disarmed, and ordered to their knees. Calvin walked calmly through the chaos, heading straight for the records room at the back of the building. Calvin pushed open the heavy wooden doors of the records room. Lieutenant Raymond Foster was desperately feeding thick stacks of paper into the machine. Destroying evidence is a federal offense, Lieutenant. Calvin's voice cut through the noise of the shredder. Foster spun around, his hand instinctively dropping to his holstered weapon. But before his fingers could even brush the leather, Calvin's Glock was drawn, aimed squarely at the center of Foster's chest. The State Bureau tactical agents poured into the room behind Calvin, leveling 4 assault rifles at the lieutenant. Take your hand off the weapon, Raymond. Slowly, Calvin ordered. Foster froze. He looked at the laser sights painting his chest, then up at the unfamiliar black man standing before him, wearing a captain's shield that Foster had never seen before. Slowly, Foster raised his hands above his head. You don't know what you're doing, Foster spat venomously. You think you can just come into my house and tear it down? I have friends in the state capitol. You're committing career suicide. Your friends are currently being indicted by District Attorney Higgins in the lobby, Calvin replied. And this is not your house anymore. It belongs to the citizens you swore to protect, and you betrayed them. Calvin looked at the tactical agents. Get him out of my sight. As Foster was frog-marched out of the room, handcuffed and disgraced, Calvin walked back into the main bullpen. More than a dozen corrupt officers were sitting on the floor in zip ties, stripped of their badges. Commander Harrison was sitting in his office, his head in his hands. Calvin walked over to the front desk. Sergeant Miller stood nervously by the computer terminals. Captain Brooks, Miller asked quietly, what happens now? Now, Sergeant, Calvin said. Now we rebuild from the ground up. We hire cops who actually want to be cops, not thugs with a state-sponsored license to steal. News vans lined the tape outside as the story broke across Atlanta. Calvin Brooks took a deep breath. The real work of restoring justice was only beginning. He pinned the gold shield to his chest. He was done hiding. Captain Calvin Brooks was here to stay. What an explosive finale. Captain Calvin Brooks dismantled an entire corrupt syndicate from the inside. Share this story of hard-edged justice. The fight for accountability never ends.